Kaye Ayub,
Hi.
MEPS International's Head of Prices and Steel Forecasts. Welcome back to the Speaking of Steel studio. Great to have you on board. How have you been keeping?
Good, thank you.
It's not been very long this time. Not the longest of waits, thankfully. Jon Carruthers-Green, our steel market analyst, back again.
Hi, Tom.
With
Yes,
some
thank
charts in front of you, some data to share.
When I need to remember one particular number, it's much better idea for me to have this chart in front of me.
Great stuff. Lovely. So today we're back in the studio to discuss MEPS's recent Green Steel Survey. It's a topic that we've discussed before, sort of middle of last year, I think. It's quite a while ago now. But there are always questions circulating around green steel, I think, from our contacts, from our subscribers, of course. So I just want to understand, sort of first and foremost, Jon, with the context that MEPS gathers information from across the market every month, all the time. What sort of prompted a formal green steel survey as such?
Okay, so I guess first of all, this isn't actually our first green steel survey. This is just the first one where we've actually published the results. We get a lot of questions from customers asking us about green steel and about green steel premiums. It seems to be something that pops up more and more often. The people who do ask it seem very, very interested in it, but as we'll probably discuss a little bit later, has that really penetrated to the rest of the market? Not entirely sure. But we want to make sure that we're giving everybody all the information that they need.
Okay, so Kate, in your capacity dealing with the price and forecasts on a monthly basis, was there something in particular that you wanted this survey to deliver, something you're intrigued about?
Yes, so we're looking to see whether the market is ready really for us to consider moving into green steel on the pricing side. So is there enough people buying green steel for us to be able to monitor steel prices on the green steel side? At the moment, we need to be able to have enough data inputs for us to do that. And I think at the moment it's not looking like that's the case. The people that are buying the steel, although they're interested in green steel, perhaps not interested in paying any more for it. That's the feedback we're certainly getting. And I'm sure Jon can give the feedback from the survey on that. So the market being the way it is, it's not in the best state. People generally don't want to buy steel at any price sometimes at the moment, let alone at a higher price for, lower carbon emission when quite often it's the same steel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a changing environment, as we've discussed in the various steel reviews this month, different emissions-based trade regulations coming into play. So yeah, things can change any time. But Jon, without sort of any further ado, can you sort of share some of the key findings from the survey?
So, as Kaye alluded to, there seem to be two very clear camps for the responses. There was the yes, we're interested in green steel. We want to know more about green steel. We want as much information on this as possible. And that, while there wasn't necessarily a huge number of people that were saying that, we saw about 40% of people that were saying that they were trading sort of some small volumes of green steel. We got 60% of responses saying they had no interest in trading it. They heard no interest from their customers. And the message that really came through from them was exactly what Kaye said. It's hard enough now to try and get people to buy steel at any particular price, never mind adding an extra 100, 150 euros on, or whatever that price ends up being. The people who did give us sort of positive feedback on green steel, there was a fairly sort of clear split on exactly how they were going to be working out those premiums. So we asked them another question. We wanted to know whether those green steel prices were negotiated separately, sort of entirely separately, or whether they were negotiating a sort of percentage premium. And that was very, very sort of split again. So I think it was 57% said a separate negotiated price and a 43% for a particular premium. But what I think that does show is there's no clear patterns just yet. While it's becoming something we're talking about a lot more often, the market hasn't really decided yet on how it's going to be dealing with green steel and green steel prices.
Yeah, okay. And a lot of legislational
Yes, so I'd
to sort
expect a
determine
lot of
those things a
things
little bit?
over the next year. But later on this year, we're expecting some feedback from the European Commission about clearer green steel labelling, and I think that's going to be really key to drive this forward. And as we get into CBAM, and that becomes one of the major topics everybody's thinking about, that's also going to push the green steel to the fore. One of the things that I haven't mentioned yet was that we saw a fairly clear split between flat and long products. So the people that did say that they were trading green steel, we got much higher figures for hot rolled coil and some galvanized coil. Those are the ones which came up sort of again and again and again when we asked people, which products are you trading? Now, for me, that is a little bit interesting because long products you tend to associate with being sort of produced more likely to be produced in an electric arc furnace, which naturally has lower emissions than a blast furnace. So I don't know whether this is a case of branding or marketing, but are these people who are sort of trading in long products, are they trading them already and not quite knowing that they're green steel?
Yeah, it's already the norm in that sector.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the comments that were gathered, as I know some people chose to feed back little bits of information in their survey responses.
Yeah.
Was there anything of interest in amongst that?
So the comments section is always the bit where you get to put in whatever you want. So we're not forcing them to write any yeses or nos. They got to really let their opinions known. And like I say, there seemed to be some strong opinions on both sides. There was a lot of people who were saying that moving towards green steel is necessary. It's going to be a part of the market that's only going to grow and grow and grow. And I kind of agree with that. But there was also a lot of people who were almost over the hype of green steel. I think they were really sort of questioning whether it was something that they can actually pass on these extra costs to their customers. They were questioning whether the demand was actually there. And I think all of these points really show, once again, that there isn't a clear direction for this. And we're going to need extra guidance. We're going to need the policymakers to really sort of step up and help guide this process. A lot of people in the industry do want to decarbonise, but they don't know exactly how to go about it. They don't know exactly how to pass these premiums on to their customers. And until all of that sort of starts to come together, which I expect we'll see in the next year or two, then it is sort of still going to be a niche product.
In recent months, in the European Steel Review in particular, we've seen a little bit of winding back of decarbonisation plans amongst steelmakers. I guess that's part of what you were talking about, Kaye. The whole difficulty in the market of pricing to appeal to people and the slim margins as well. Is that? Do you think that's becoming a real issue for steelmakers in the long term, bringing this green steel to the fore?
Yeah, and also the additional costs of the green steel plants. Some countries have got higher costs than others. I mean, in Germany, for instance, they've got higher electricity costs than, say, in the likes of Sweden. So some of these plants have got much higher costs associated with them than in other countries. And despite government investments in those plants, actually, we're talking big sums as well in those, that it's still not enough. And the likes of, say, ArcelorMittal, who've obviously been dialing back on some of their green steel investments, they're still asking for more help and more investment in those if they're wanting to move towards greener steelmaking. And it needs more help, really, and more investment if they're going to move towards green steel plants in some of the Western European countries. So, if you look at where the green steel plants are located, actually, we're seeing Sweden. We've got quite a few in Sweden. We've got Italy, I think France as well. We've seen some in there, but actually, we're not seeing as many in some of the more traditional steelmaking countries. So we might just see the green steel plants being not in the countries you see more of the current, production in Europe. So
Well, I think with energy costs being such a sort of a key factor of this, it's going to be the plants perhaps relocating to where that cheap energy is.
yeah,
If we're talking about sort of electrification for a lot of these plants, then we're going to be looking at places where we can sort of get renewables at a much lower cost. So we are talking sort of Scandinavia, where they've got sort of hydroelectric facilities, or perhaps even sort of further south. I mean, there's is it Blaster in Spain, which is obviously going to be. I think that's being sort of talked about at the moment. I'm not sure exactly how far that plant's got. But anywhere that can then really sort of take advantage of the low cost renewable new energy, I think is really going to see the advantage. So yes, it will. It'll leave places like Germany perhaps finding it a lot more difficult than they sort of first thought. I mean, the will was certainly there, but when you actually sort of look at the books, can you afford it?
and then when they're trying to compete against, some of the non-Europeans, I mean, Turkey, for instance, North Africa, some of those other countries that already got quite low carbon emissions for their steel making. So we're talking about CBAM coming in the 1st of January. The CBAM charges or the CBAM, costs, they're actually not going to be that high for some of their, imports, because they've already got reasonably low emissions, lower than some of the current European steel plants. So are they going to be able to compete initially, certainly in the first few years, until these green steel plants are up and running? So actually they're going to be at an advantage importing wise.
I guess we've spoken about it before in terms of the European Commission's plans to decarbonise and sort of boost this transition. But there needs to be those, well, there are in Europe in particular, those lead sectors such as automotive and construction, where things will be mandated in terms of the consumption of green steel. Does that mean there might be a divide in terms of contract and spot pricing going forward? Because
that was another
on the spot market, there's less demand.
Okay, yes. So the survey responses we saw that it was really the automotive industry that got mentioned the most often, and we've done some research around this. And while there are no sort of European-wide mandates, there is a voluntary code which the automotive industry is working towards, with sort of a lifetime emissions of their products. And of course, sourcing the materials in a cleaner, greener manner is going to be a big part of that. I think the idea of these voluntary rules is so that there aren't any mandatory rules going to be coming in. The other sort of industry that got mentioned a couple of times was construction, but this seemed to be a lot more location specific. So when we sort of dug into this in a bit more detail, it's more led at a sort of a country level. And once again, we're looking at lifetime emissions of buildings, and as well as the sort of the construction side of things, which we'll be most interested in. They're also looking at sort of emissions while that building's in use over the next 30, 40, 50 years. But the construction side of things is going to be more key for us. So it's mainly sort of countries in Scandinavia. So Denmark was one of the big ones that had some of the most stringent regulations, and those are the two industries that we saw sort of the most penetration. We saw the most sort of responses. Some of the other industries are sort of lagging slightly further behind.
Well, we've seen those prices coming down in recent months. So, everyone needs to make a margin. Yeah. As you say, Kaye, that's the priority at the moment, isn't it? That affordability, and green steel perhaps not playing a part in that at the moment.
Yeah. And as a distributor, if you're trying to sell on the spot market and you're struggling to sell normal steel and your margins are getting squeezed, you're not going to be able to sell green steel at a higher premium when your customers are struggling to pay that for the higher emitting, or your dirty steel, shall we say.
Absolutely.
So I suppose when we get to find out what the additional costs are going to be for as CBAM comes in, then perhaps everybody's thinking of the bottom line. if that additional cost gets added, then that's just going to be another factor that's going to push people towards green steel. I don't think anybody has anything necessarily against the idea of green steel. I think everybody would like to do it, but it comes down to, can I make money? And it's only really when that financial cost, when the cost of the carbon gets added, that we're going to see a greater uptake.
I guess it's hard to know, to calculate until those European Commission sort of CBAM benchmarks come out later in the year, exactly how much it's going to potentially tip the balance towards green steel and domestic steel makers. But does CBAM have the potential to provide the tipping point and drive green steel adoption in the spot market in particular?
Well, I think CBAM, in association with the changes to the EU ETS scheme, which is bringing European steelmakers into the point where they're going to have to sort of pay for their carbon. Both of those are kicking off at the start of 2026, and both of those are going to apply additional costs for this carbon. It's going to be gradually brought in, so that's going to be sort of worked in over the next 10 years or so. But really with those, that I think that's going to be the key driver. The other point, which I think we just touched on very briefly, was there's a lot of confusion about what green steel is. There is no clearly defined benchmarks. Some of the people that we speak to would suggest it's sort of below, say, 1 ton of CO2 for a ton of steel. Some say it's much lower, some say higher. And there's no formal recognised agreement on this. This is another thing the European Commission's working on. They're currently consulting now with the steel industry exactly how a labelling system should be set up. And I think what we're most likely going to see is going to be sort of a shades of green style assessment. So the greenest of greens will be those plants that are perhaps using electric arc furnaces and being powered by renewables, all the way up back to sort of your dirtier black steel, which is essentially sort of where a lot of the industry is now.
So there's a chance that, particularly in Europe, where these regulations are coming into play, soon all steel could be a shade of green steel. Is that fair to say?
I mean, yeah, there'll be a scale. Yeah, and it'll be whereabouts on that scale you are. I mean, we're already seeing, mills offering a form of green steel. It's just under what guise is that green steel? Like Jon says, there's no recognised definition at the moment, but everybody seems to be already offering green steel under some, designated green steel, whether that's carbon offsetting, whether it's, under 1 ton of carbon emitted steel, or another form that they've, sort of put on their own labelled green steel. We're seeing a lot of electric arc furnaces, for instance, saying, well, we're an electric arc furnace, we produce some scrap, therefore we are green steel, which you see already a lot, on the long product side. So they're already saying, well, we're already an electric arc furnace, so why do you need to move to green steel? Because we're already recycled, which is probably why there's less adoption on the long products side of things. Because, a lot of customers already think, well, I'm already there in theory, so why do I need to? So a lot of times it's just a certificate. So we've seen customers sort of say, well, we could pay this additional cost just to get the same steel certified as green steel, but it's technically the same steel. So what's the point?
Is it just in Europe then that we're seeing this potential change? Is there any appetite in the rest of the world to adopt green steel?
I'd certainly say Europe's the driver. I think the European Union, the European Commission, and the rest of the governments there are very much sort of dead set on the idea of applying sort of carbon costs to industries like steel and cement and all the other ones that are being caught up in CBAM. We are seeing other areas though that are beginning to start talk about applying carbon costs. In Asia, we've got South Korea and Taiwan. They're in sort of certain stages of that. Over in North America, I believe Canada's working on a similar scheme. Still a lot sort of earlier on in the stage than we are in Europe. But I think one of the key aims, not an aim, perhaps an aspiration of the European CBAM scheme is that a carbon price ends up being global. I think that's certainly where they would like to sort of see this in, say, 20, 30 years' time. And it is going to be those kind of timescales we're looking at. It is going to take a long time to get to this position. We've barely even started with CBAM. They're starting with sectors like iron and steel and electricity, all these other ones which are sort of hard to abate the emissions costs. But more and more industries are going to be dragged into this. This is one of the key bits of legislation, key bits of sort of aspiration that is within Europe.
I suppose those timescales you're talking about there put into context the current economic climate and do make you realise that these things, the decarbonisation message needs to have legs and it's got a long time to gestate before we get to where we need to be, I suppose. As it stands right now, I mean, MEPS, clearly the focus is prices and price forecasting. It's a key consideration. It's what people subscribe for alongside the commentaries. MEPS doesn't currently publish a green steel price per se, but is that something that the business is planning at this stage to take forward or evaluate?
It's something that we would like to do at some point, but that's not something that we can do unless the market is ready for. So the way that we do our pricing is we need to have sufficient pricing inputs to be able to analyse that data, and at the moment there's just not enough pricing inputs to be able to do that. So like Jon says, most of the deals seem to be getting done on a contract side, and our pricing's done on a monthly basis. So there's just not enough deals getting concluded in the green steel on a monthly basis to be able to evaluate that monthly. So we can't do a green steel price unless we have enough pricing inputs on a monthly basis, and that's not happening at the moment.
And researchers really have got their fingers on the pulse, haven't they, Jon? I mean, as I said before, this Green Steel Survey was a standalone. Well, it'll happen again. It'll be repeated. But in terms of MEPS research, it's a month by month by month. So the researchers are constantly aware of the appetite and those price points that are coming in. So I guess, there'll be a reaction at some point in future.
Yeah, we'll just continue to monitor it. And as soon as there is a shift in the market, potentially after CBAM comes in and things perhaps start to move. I mean, once there's an additional CBAM cost and the dirtier steel becomes more expensive, maybe the green steel prices, will come closer and there'll be more appetite then for green steel. Perhaps then we'll get more people buying it and we're able to then have more people providing those prices to us. Until then, unfortunately, we can't do anything about it because we can't just make a price up because that's not something that we do. Yeah. But, until that point, we will continue to monitor the market and we will move as soon as the market's ready.
Yeah, so. A methodology has to have value in itself, doesn't it? Before we can assess those prices. Yeah,
we monitor the market, we don't set the market. So.
Quite. Jon, great work with the Green Steel Survey.
Thank you.
We'll see it back again, will we? When is there a plan to repeat it after a duration of time?
So we are. These are going to become more regular, and then what we're now going to do is where they were sort of more an internal thing. So we kind of understood where the market was. What we're looking to do is to start writing more articles about this and make sure that everybody else knows what we know.
Great stuff. That really brings the transparency to the market that MEPS is trying to achieve. So, yeah, great to see. Kaye, Jon, thanks ever so much for coming back into the studio and joining us for Speaking of Steel. Great episode. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.